Prologue. The cot of neem wood. They lay me upon a cot woven with neem fibers, the smell of the bitter leaves keeping flies from my eyes. The rains have not yet come, but the air carries that coppery premonition before thunder breaks a season open. A young monk sits cross-legged by my feet, a scroll balanced upon his knees. He is one of my students', and his voice, when he speaks, is like water in a clay jar. "Master," he says, "tell it to us again from the beginning. Tell us how you came to India with the Macedonian king and why you, Anekātos to your mother, unconquered by birth, laid your spear upon a stone and chose to be conquered by a silence." I laugh with the breath I have left. "Child," I tell him, "names are nets that tear when the river deepens. But since you bid it, I will thread the past once more." What follows I give not as a history to be argued in marketplaces, but as a life to be weighed on the palm, a soldier's palm, calloused by spear haft, and then smoothed at last by the rim of a begging bowl. If I embroider where memory frays, let the wise forgive me. If I speak plainly where myth prefers thunder, let the lovers of thunder forgive me as well. I was there, and I am leaving. Memory is a lamp set in a doorway, and the wind is rising. Chapter 1. The River That Said No. I was 22 when we reached the Hyphasis. The Indians call her the Beas, and all the spears of Macedon pointed not east but downward to the wet earth at our own feet. We had crossed the Hellespont with laughter and salt air in our hair. We had broken Darius, crossed the desert that broke horses, burned cities that healed slowly. We had wrested elephants by their ivory and taught them to fear fire. We were the iron line in the mouth of the world, and still the world opened its jaw wider. After Hydaspes, Jhelum they call it, where King Porus fought like a hill itself uprooted and set walking, we moved between new rivers with names that hissed like snakes at noon, Assassines, Hydriotes, and at last the Hyphasis. The rains came early, or perhaps they are always early here. The sky was a wet hide, and the ground a memory of being hard. The campfires smouldered more than burned, and the mules groaned like old doors. Men who had marched from Pella began to talk in the dark. I heard their voices because I, Anekātos, son of Damagetus, had a talent for listening even before I learned to listen for the inner music. Not the grumbling of common soldiers. My ears were thick with that and had been since Issus, but the tight, careful rustle of officers who plan what they will never call mutiny. Coenus, whose words carried the weight of a bronze bell. Seleucus, who saw maps even when he closed his eyes. Meleager, who gleamed and sulked by turns like a fish just pulled from a river. What did they say? That the men were tired. That the ocean we had been promised lay still farther east, past jungles that devoured boots like bread, past kingdoms that summoned elephants in numbers the Greeks had not even imagined in dreams, past the Ganges itself, a river so wide, we were told, that boats upon it became dots on the palm. They said the men had left sons who would forget their faces, wives who would remarry their shadows. They said Alexander was a god only so long as we believed our feet were his. Words like that cannot be picked up again once dropped. The king felt the currents as any fisherman feels his line tug beneath dark water. He ordered a sacrifice to unknown gods that had names like rain. He paced the banks of the Hyphasis, his cloak clinging to his shoulders like seaweed, and looked at a river swollen with the season and with the grudges of men. In those days I sometimes walked the perimeter of his pavilion, the linen walls breathing in and out with the damp. You could hear him inside, the king we had followed beyond the line where maps grow into margins. You could hear him think. His thinking had a sound, like whetstone on sword. He called the men together, a sea of bronze and mud, and spoke of the ocean. He spoke of a world that curved away from us, of shores where the sun bled and was reborn. He promised altars on the very rim of the earth. He promised that our sons' sons would draw water with our names on it. We had seen the way his voice could transfigure hunger, could make wounds into medals. But rain is a god whose temple is the whole sky. His words rolled off our helmets, and then Coenus, who loved Alexander and feared him in equal measure, stepped forward. He did not kneel. He did not shout. He spoke the way you would talk to a horse that could break you if frightened. "King," he said, and there was no tremor in his mouth. "The men's hearts are backward now. They will march, but not toward the ocean. Let us turn, not because we do not love you, but because we would see home while we still remember the way to it." A hush, even the rain listening. Alexander turned his back to us and stood for a time with his head bowed to the river. I have always believed that was the moment he wrestled himself as once he had wrestled unity from nations. It is a hard thing to stop being what your legend requires. He returned, faced no longer the face of a storm, and said only, "We will build altars here then, to mark the limit where men would not follow a king." And we did. 12 mounds, 12 towers like teeth planted in a jaw. We sacrificed. Did the ancient things men do when they are lost and pretend they are not. We built a fleet on the high Daspes. Nearchus took command like a man accepting a marriage he had known was coming all along. We turned our faces toward the south and west, into the mouths of rivers and the mouths of deserts that would swallow some of us dry and some drowned. But before we left, the king had a curiosity to feed, and it was that curiosity that loosed me from his shadow. There were rumors of sages, naked men who stood in the rain without flinching, who could stare down kings and sons, men who had chosen hunger for its clarity, men who said perhaps to every assertion, like priests of doubt. The Greeks called them gymnosophists, naked wise ones. The Indians, with less poetry but more respect, called them shramanas, strivers. The king wanted to prove that he too could stand bare to the weather. He wanted to argue with men who argued with the world. He sent for them, and they came, thin as strings pulled taut between two pegs, loosely, like they would have come for anyone who asked. Not like men summoned by a conqueror, but like teachers who do not visit students so much as the other way around. There were 7 or 9, I have heard both numbers as my life retold itself, but one of them had a gaze that would unhorse even a memory. I had never seen a man with nothing own the ground under his feet so completely. Chapter 2. The Sky-Clad and the King. It was a clearing near the river, tall grasses kneeling under the rain. We, men who counted their worth by what clung to our bodies, bronze breastplates, horsehair crests, rings, the little stitched pouches of silver coin, stood facing men who wore only the rain. There were scars on their ribs like script written by a river that had once tried to drown them and failed. They smelled of smoke and cardamom and something clean, like stone in a stream. Alexander, whose eyes were blue until they were anything he wanted them to be, stood with his staff and smiled the smile we all knew from sieges, the one that creaks like a door opening onto a treasury. He had brought a Greek interpreter and an Indian sage who spoke our tongue like a man playing a flute he had never learned and yet had always known. "Ask them," the king said, "what they believe." The interpreter hesitated. The sage with the flute voice tilted his head and asked in their language, which washed and clicked and hummed like a necklace struck by the hand that wears it. One of the sky-clad men, his hair matted into ropes that hung like roots, stepped forward. His eyes never left the king. "We believe," came the answer, "that to be born is to enter debt, and to die is to pay interest without touching the principal. We believe the hand that harms another harms itself, as a hand that strikes a wall bruises the same bones that cast the fist. We believe truth has 7 faces, and that anyone who says only about a thing has not walked around it." "7 faces?" Alexander smiled. "I have seen only 2 on most men, war and sleep." The sage did not smile back. "Perhaps you have looked too quickly." "Perhaps," Alexander said, which for him was a generous concession. "And if I ask you to come with me, to be honored in the courts of Persia and Babylon, would you walk with me?" Another sage, younger, lifted a hand. His nails were long, each a little crescent moon. "I will walk with you as far as the cave where I sit," he said, "and then I will turn around and be where I already am." "Bold," murmured Ptolemy at my side. "He speaks to a man who has replaced where with mine in half a world." The king asked many questions. What is the soul? Where does a man go when he sleeps? Are pleasures good? Is pain useful? Why refuse to dress, to eat meat, to marry and leave seed? The sky-clad did not always answer with answers. They answered with questions that were not evasions, but tests. "What is a man?" one asked the king. "A creature that divides," Alexander said promptly. "He divides land from sea, friend from foe, north from south, life from death. He divides until he knows the shape of the world." "A creature that divides," the sage repeated. "Then see if dividing yourself from your craving also gives you a countermarch to know." He did not say these things insolently. He said them like a man handing a knife to someone who knows knives. One of the sages, older than stone and twice as calm, sat on a rock through the whole exchange. He did not speak. He looked not at the king, but at the space where a thought would appear just before it arrived. It is not easy to look that way, I know. I spent years learning. When the formal arguments grew thin and the rain heavier, the king dismissed us to the edges. I remained because I had learned to be still when the ground was muddy and a horse snorted at my shoulder. The sage who had not spoken looked at me as if I were a goat that had wandered into a debate and had somehow become the question itself. After a while, the king came quietly to him, alone, and sat on the ground. When two kinds of power recognize each other, they do not always clash. Sometimes they make a kind of tent that keeps rain off everyone nearby. "You do not speak," the king said. The sage inclined his head, and his voice, when it emerged at last, was dry tinder catching in a wet world. "Words," he said, "are snares that pretend to be ladders." "And yet I am a climber," Alexander said. His voice had softened, the way it did when he spoke to his horse. "I have not seen a height yet that would not let me up." The sage reached down and lifted a pebble. "Climb this," he said. Alexander laughed. He laughed like a lake startled by noon light. He liked men who threw pebbles at him and called them mountains. He liked to prove them wrong. "Tell me a thing," the king said, sobering the way weather sobers. "If I command the world but not myself, what have I commanded?" "Noise," the sage said. "Plenty of it. Enough to keep you from hearing a quieter thing that is all the king you will ever be." "What thing?" asked Alexander. "The sound of the unstruck," the sage said. The king frowned. "The what?" "The sound that does not begin when two objects meet. The sound that is present before drums are invented. Call it the breath of the world's ear." Alexander rubbed his jaw, the gesture that meant a bridge was being built somewhere in him. "Can a man hear such a sound? Can a man stop contesting long enough to be a man?" The sage countered softly. I do not know all that passed between them. Only that night the king did not ask for wine, and the next day he did not argue with Keenus when Keenus reiterated the men's grief. He sent gifts to the sages, grains and salt and blankets, and they accepted them without bowing or boasting, with the calm of a man who accepts rain that has fallen on everyone and happens simply to fill his own cup one last inch. It was 2 days later that I broke rank. Or rather, I allowed myself to be broken by what I had seen, as a river allows itself to be divided by a prow and still keeps moving. Chapter 3. The Bowl and the Vow. He was waiting by a banyan whose roots had braided themselves into a seat fit for a king who had mislaid both throne and kingdom. He was not the silent one, but his silence was as well made as any jewel. A thin cloth hung over one shoulder. Otherwise he wore the weather and a necklace of shriveled berries that smelled like stories. His right arm was scarred where the skin had healed around heat. His left hand cradled a stone bowl carved so thin you could see the rain make shadows through it. "Muni," I said, using the title I had heard our interpreter use. "Sage." He looked at me and did not look at my armor. "Soldier," he said. His voice was neither warm nor cold. It fit my ears like old shoes. "I am Anekātos," I told him, because a name is the first bridge men throw. "I marched from Amphipolis." He nodded. "You marched from yesterday," he said. I could have argued. We Greeks have fine words for saying fine things to prove other fine things foolish. But the rain was washing pride off the world, and my words felt like small pots against a great sky. "Were you always as you are?" I asked instead. "You mean naked?" he said, and for the first time his mouth tilted, not a smile, a relief. No, no one is born in the world. We are born in a story, and then spend our lives learning what the world would be if it could speak without us interrupting. What is your name? I asked. They call me Bhadraketu, he said. It pleases them and costs me nothing. The name meant, I learned later, something like auspicious banner, a name that would have sounded at home among our cavalry standards, and yet belonged, in his case, to a man whose only banner was skin. You would teach me, I said, and at once I blushed at my own audacity. Not Sanskrit, not your gods. If you have gods, for your talk makes gods look like stalls in a bazaar, but whatever it is you stare at when you close your eyes. He was silent long enough for me to wish I'd stayed a soldier entirely. Then he said, You carry a spear. A spear is a piece of the world persuaded to be straight. Can you lay it down without bending? I was in armor. I had watch duty at dusk. My captain, good man, thin patience, would flay me with his tongue if I did not return. And yet a river that has found a new bed does not apologize to its old stones. Let me ask the king, I said. He owns my spear more than I do. He nodded and sat, as if my question had already been answered, and he was now doing the easier work of waiting for me to catch up. I walked back to camp with rain in my hair like laurel and dread in my belly like wine. Alexander listened as he oiled a crease in his cuirass, his hands moving with a lover's absent-minded precision. He did not look up until I had finished. Then he stood and narrowed his eyes into that sun squint he used when measuring a river for a fording. You have served, he said. You fought at the Hydaspes and did not look away when the elephants trumpeted. You carried rations to a man you did not like when he could not walk on his own. I remember these things, even if you forget them when you look at naked men who can do tricks with silence. My king, I said, and in my mouth the words tasted different than they had the day before, salt instead of iron. I do not wish to abandon you. But if your glory has taught me anything, it is to follow the road that terrifies me because it is new. He rubbed his jaw, stubble rasping under palm. Once in Egypt, a priest told me that a man conquers either the land or himself, and that the first conquest is popular and the second is necessary. I have done much of the first. I wonder if I will ever do the second. He set the cuirass down. You would be my envoy then, he said, but it was half a jest, like a fisherman baptizing a fish he is about to throw back. Your envoy to what? I asked. To what happens when a spear is laid down without bending, he said quietly. Go to your sage. Learn what you can. Wear what you must. Return if the world still needs conquering when you're done. Or don't return, and let your not returning be my embassy to the thing that does not send ambassadors. He paused, then added more briskly, But leave your pay chest with Hephaestion. I will have no saint funded by my army's salt. I laughed, and he did too, and then his hand found the back of my neck. Aniketos, he said, and his eyes did not look anywhere but into mine. You are unconquered because you have not yet chosen a worthy enemy. Be sure you are not choosing cowardice and calling it peace. I will try not to, I said. Try not to, he echoed. And for a heartbeat, the great engine that was Alexander fell quiet. Try to do it. I carried my spear to the banyan and laid it on the roots. Bhadraketu touched it once with a sort of blessing that was less about the spear and more about the roots that now had a story to drink. He gave me a cloth, thinner than any I had ever worn. He taught me how to fold it so that it was neither a display nor a joke. What must I do? I asked. Sit, he said. Where? He gestured to a patch of earth that looked exactly like any other patch of earth. There is only one seat, he said. We move it by believing that we do. So I sat. I waited for instructions the way a soldier waits for an enemy to break formation. He stood behind me and said, Do not make the breath polite. Let it be how it is when you fall asleep by accident. I exhaled. Rain drummed, rivulets braided. Somewhere a parakeet insulted a cloud. And now, he said, listen for the sound that does not begin. At first I heard the obvious, rain, a mule stamping at flies, the chink of a pot against another pot. Then, as layers peel when you forget your hands are sticky, other sounds appeared. A low thrumming like bees drowning under silk, a steady current like river on stone inside a cave, a whistle as fine as a reed flute played 2 valleys away, then a ringing like a hammered bowl that refuses to stop. Then, no metaphors left because metaphors are the last defenders of arrogance. A presence, not sound anymore, not the absence of sound either, a kind of listening that listened to me. I wept, but without drama. The tears found their own work. I do not know how long passed before he touched my shoulder. Enough, Bhadraketu said. What is it? I whispered. If you were Greek, you would name it and write a hymn, he said, not unkindly. If you were a priest, you would put a wall around it and sell tickets at dawn. We call it nada, the unstruck, the inner current. It is not one thing, and it is not many, and both statements are true in some respect. Syād, he murmured when he saw my confusion. Perhaps. You Greeks love to say is and is not. We say, in some respect it is, and in some respect it is not, and 5 more ways that tired men cannot remember until they are less tired. Syādvāda is the doctrine of perhaps. Anekāntavāda is the doctrine that truth is many-sided. Ahimsa is the vow that keeps our mouths from chewing truth like meat, and our hands from proving we are right by breaking furniture. Ahimsa, I said. The word fit against the roof of my mouth like a coin. You will take vows, he said. No killing, not with spear, not with word, no stealing, not with hand, not with desire, no lying, not even when kindness puts on a mask. Celibacy, which is the art of letting the river run without seeing where it ends, and no possession, which is harder than nakedness. You will not eat meat. You will not pull a carrot from the earth because it is a city and you would be tearing down houses. You will fast sometimes, not to prove you are strong, but to see how little is needed to be. Will I still be Greek? I asked softly. He considered. You will still be someone your mother loved, he said. And if you listen long enough, you will understand that this is not a small thing. I took the vows. The army took the rivers. I watched the banners swim away in the rain, and I did not feel abandoned. I felt placed. We walked south with a small band of mendicants. Bhadraketu, myself, 2 younger monks who called me brother as if the word had always meant a man who had once worn bronze. We begged in villages, our bowls like questions. We slept in caves that smelled of bat and God. I learned to stand as still as a tree when children came to tug at my cloth, giggling because I was pale where they were brown, and I could not stop my eyes from running when I chewed chilies by mistake. I learned the threefold way the Muni taught, to place ahimsa first in gesture and then in thought, to turn every assertion in the palm. Syād in this respect, yes. Syād in that respect, no. Syād in some respect, indescribable, until certainty gave way to care, and to walk around truth as if it were a beast sleeping in the sun, to see how many sides it had before calling it by a single name. My old comrades passed like weather. In a village near Taxila, I watched a procession, an Indian king and the Greek king, not Alexander this time, but one of his governors, glancing at each other like men measuring a bridge they might need to burn or cross. I heard later of Kalanos, the gymnosophist who let himself be consumed by fire in Susa. Men argued about whether he was mad or wise, a candle boasting of its own wick. I felt no need to choose an epithet for him, Syād, said the quiet voice. Once, in a grain court where peacocks had the run of the place like women at a well, I saw a boy with eyes that would one day carry a nation on their own whites. He was angular with hunger and learning. A teacher addressed him with the carefulness reserved for snakes and kings. I learned the boy's name later from another mendicant, Chandragupta. He would make an empire from Magadha and then leave it, as a snake leaves a skin. But that is an arrow shot from a bow I am not yet drawing in this chapter. It was years before I saw Alexander again, and then only in a dream made by news. He was dead in Babylon, unmoored in fever, the giver of worlds lying on a plain pallet, asking for air and getting history instead. The road that led me from him had led me toward him too, in a circle whose center was a bowl. Chapter 4. The Lineage of the Unstruck. You ask me how a soldier becomes a sage, and I say to you, slowly, like a blade rusting into a plowshare, and suddenly, like a hawk realizing the wind has been holding it up all along. I learned to hear the inner current anywhere, under rains that made music of their falling, in markets where men bartered as if the world could be weighed, in the quiet between my own breaths. It was not mere sound anymore, though sometimes it began as sound. Hive, river, flute, bell. It was more like a consent that ran through the bones of things. When I forgot, it forgave me. When I remembered, it did not praise me. It was there the way a king's road is there even for a peasant who does not know who paid for the stones. Vegetarianism was simple and not simple. Meat had always been feast to me, the smell of victory pressed into flesh. I gave it up as I would give up armor, and my body argued for a month. Then the argument ended, and I discovered pulses, millet, sesame ground by an old woman whose bangles sang, rice that stuck to my fingers like a child's hand. We did not pull roots. We did not crush green shoots. We covered our mouths with cloth when the wind stirred dust, so that small lives fluttering there might not become unmarked graves in our throats. Ahimsa required a bravery I had never practiced. Not striking an enemy is easy when no one raises a hand. Not striking a friend when his words are careless requires more spine than holding a shield in a rain of arrows. I learned to stand between a landlord and a hungry man without becoming either. Once, on a road by the Sutlej, a caravan's camel driver raised his stick at a boy who had stumbled and slowed the train. I stepped in and took the blow without ceremony. The man's shame was more painful to him than my bruise was to me. That night he gave the boy more dates than the boy could reasonably eat. Ahimsa is not passivity. It is the art of refusing to multiply pain. Syādvāda taught me to hold my tongue not with teeth, but with tenderness. A village argument about a boundary stone, a rock worn like a tooth by centuries of seasons, would have been settled in Greece by a line drawn with a general's staff. Here I asked each man to tell the story of the stone from the place where he stood. Syād, in this respect, the field is yours, I would say. Syād, in another respect, the field is his. We would walk around the argument until it had so many facets that it could no longer cut. The men began to laugh at themselves. Laughter is the eldest cousin of wisdom. Anekāntavāda, the many-sided, was not just a doctrine for courts. It was a tonic for the heart. When grief came, when a young monk died of fever, or when I learned of Hephaestion's death and felt Alexander's loneliness like the echo of a horn in a gorge, I did not cling to the stories that make grief a tyrant. Syād, in some respect, the world is loss, I told my pulse. Syād, in some respect, it is abundance I am too tired to name. Then came the day when a dozen men and women sat before me and asked me to give them a vow. Who am I to give anything? I asked Bhadraketu in private. He was older now, older in a way that is not years so much as a smoother stone. You are a man who has carried a spear farther than most carry a thought, he said, and you laid it down. That is a lineage. So I gave the vows as they had been given to me. I taught the listening as it had been taught to me. I spoke of the inner current not as a mystery that makes a monk precious, but as a birthright so ordinary that we dismiss it until thirst makes even ordinary water holy. We were not a sect that sought to multiply. We were a way that sought to deepen. Still, a name came to us as names do when others need to speak of you in a hurry. They called us the unstruck path, and sometimes, with a smile, the Greeks mendicants, as if my pale skin were a banner and not a door. We taught three things and a fourth that braided them: the vow of not harming, the habit of perhaps, the walk-around of many-sidedness, and the practice of sitting until the inner sound found you because you had finally stopped shouting. Master, a novice asked me once, what is the surprising thing? That you are not a mistake, I said, and that nothing you touch is either. Years folded. A message reached me in the Aravalli Hills, where boulders balanced like questions defying gravity with perfect poise. A great king was renouncing his kingdom and walking with a sage to the south, to a place where granite remembers its own patience. I walked to see for myself. There he was, the boy I had seen once in Taxila. Now, with a king's gait slowed deliberately to the pace of a man watching ants cross a path so he would not break their migration. The sage with him was called Bhadrabahu. The king was Chandragupta. They walked to Shravanabelagola, where the hills shine like the backs of sleeping elephants at noon, and there the king would learn to die slowly, unharmed by his own leaving. Syād, I murmured when I saw them. Perhaps power is not an opposite of renunciation, but its rehearsal. Bhadraketu was near his own leaving by then. He called me to his side and took my hand as if it were a bowl. Aniketos, he said, using the old name, tasting it as if it were a fruit. You have not been conquered. I have been entirely conquered, I said, and we both smiled at the same time. I give you nothing, he said, and in that I give you what I've been given. When I am gone, listen harder. And then he placed his hand upon my head. It is a common gesture, and yet it is the crown I have worn most lightly. When he died, he did it as he had done everything else. He sat down and let breath be what it is when it is tired. We do not grieve as armies do. We do not wave flags at absence. We cook grain. We tend the living skin of the village with small kindnesses, each a stitch. But that night, when the hearth had cooled, I heard the bell note in my chest like the day we first sat beneath the banyan. It was not sorrow. It was permission widening. You ask about the secret lineage. The phrase makes me laugh gently with the fondness we reserve for child grandiose. We were never secret out of shame. We were hidden in the way a spring is hidden until a thirsty traveler kneels. If there is a lineage, it is a string through a necklace of men and women who have learned to choose the second conquest when the world calls with trumpets for the first. Once, a rough soldier from the northwest, a Greek by his father, an Indian by his mother, came to me with a sword hilt wrapped in cloth like a wound he was tending. Teach me, he said. I have killed without pleasure and spared without pride. I do not know what to be. I gave him a bowl. I asked for a teaching, he said, baffled. Here, I said, the teaching. He thought I was mocking him and flushed. Then he sat down and saw that I was not mocking, and after a long time he stood up and held the bowl as if it were fate he could carry without dropping. He became one of the better teachers after me. He moved along rivers. He taught the villagers to listen not only for the inner sound, but for the granary that overflows next door while their own is empty. Ahimsa, he learned, has a voice for policy as much as for prayer. As I near my own leaving, the bowl rests on a woven mat beside this cot. It is the same bowl, stone thin as a fingernail, light enough that a promise can lift it. The young monk at my feet writes quickly. He will edit none of this because he has learned early that a dying man does not require better grammar. Now I make the only confession I have left that feels like a sin and not a flower. I have loved Alexander all my days, not the man who walked, the man who wanted to know what a horizon would do if you chased it. He is alive every time a child runs to the next hill because the first one was not high enough. He is dead every time a king sharpens a knife on the name of a god. When we parted, he placed his hand on my neck and gave me back to myself. I have tried in return to give others back to themselves. If there is glory in that, it is a fine glory for men without shoes. Would he have renounced, had fever not taken him? Syād. Perhaps in one life he turned his army around at the Hyphasis and then turned himself around at a deeper river. In some respect, he did the second through me, which is a thought I would never say in a marketplace, and will risk now only because I am leaving the marketplace at last. Master, the young monk says, what should we do when you are not here? The thing you were doing when you forgot I was here, I tell him. Sit, listen. Do the gentle thing even when it is the brave thing. Speak perhaps to pride and walk around to certainty. Eat what leaves its roots in the ground. Carry the bowl without making it a banner. He leans forward, his hairline a charcoal crescent, his eyes wet as I have seen men's eyes become when they realize they are not being asked to be extraordinary, only true. Will you give me your bowl? He asks, and the question is so naked I could dress it with a smile or a story. I do neither. I place the bowl in his hands. It sits there as if it had been made for those hands on a day older than pottery. Outside, the neem leaves rattle. The first thunder of the season is a drum struck by an unstruck stick. The room fills not with light but with a softening, as if the air had forgiven us for needing it. I had thought to end with a Greek poem, something pithy about ships and harbors. Instead I hear the sound, the first sound, the last one. It is neither farewell nor greeting. It is the road itself realizing the foot has become the traveler. I will not teach you how to die. I have only learned how to listen while dying. The rest is a secret I share with no one, because it is a secret kept by no one. When you hear it, you will know why the river said no to a king, and why the king and the soldier both said yes to a bowl. And if someone, 50 years from now, or 100, walks barefoot on stones worn smooth by the squares of their own vows and asks where this lineage began, tell them, with a spear laid straight and a stone bowl lifted, with a king who conceded the reign its argument, with a soldier who listened to what did not begin. Tell them it began where everything begins, in that place inside the ear where thunder is born. Postscript, a handful of perhaps. When my students argue after I'm gone, as all students must, to become teachers, let them hold 7 sentences in their mouths like seeds. In some respect, the world is one. In some respect, it is many. In some respect, it is both one and many. In some respect, it is neither one nor many. In some respect, it is describable, like the length of a spear. In some respect, it is indescribable, like the first sound. In some respect, it is both describable and indescribable, like love. This is syādvāda spelt in a soldier's alphabet. Do with it what you do with a bowl. Hold it, fill it, empty it, pass it on. And when you lay it down, lay it straight. Top of form, bottom of form.